Welcome to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. And now your host, Tim Johnson.
Dr. Shawn Wilson, Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, joins us when we return on this edition of the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
Passion, experience, safety. These are what set Arkell Constructors apart as a premier general contractor. At Arkell Constructors, our goal is to exceed our clients' expectations, whether it's commercial, industrial, or facility maintenance. We have the team and processes in place to provide a solution for you. To us, every project is a resume for our future. Arkell Constructors, the solution for your next building project. Promoting workplace safety and family wellness. That's our motto at Gulf Coast Occupational Medicine. The Gulf Coast staff is made up of some of the most knowledgeable and hardest working medical professionals in Louisiana. We care about your safety and your bottom line. With 8 convenient locations in the greater Baton Rouge area, our services include injury management, physical exams, medical surveillance, and substance abuse testing. For more information, visit us on the web at gcombr.info and ride the wave to safety.
It might be one of the most efficient, most effective methods of communications we've ever used.
Since 1919, we've designed and constructed hundreds of industrial plants, roads, ships, dams, and executed some of the most complex jobs in the world. In fact, our quality and dependability are legendary. Today, the legend continues as Brown & Root delivers engineering, construction, maintenance, and industrial specialty services throughout the U.S. and the world from our headquarters here in Louisiana. We are Brown & Root.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Dr. Shawn Wilson, Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation, is our guest. Welcome, buddy.
Thank you, Tim. Happy to be here.
Glad you are. I think most of the folks who watch this show are probably relatively familiar with DOTD, but give us a big picture overview of what you are responsible for.
Well, I'll tell you, I think folks think they know, but they really don't know exactly how broad DOTD's responsibilities are. We've got 4,200 employees all around the state of Louisiana. Over 3,000 of them are spread out across the state and not in the building at headquarters. And they're responsible for over 16,000 miles of road. We investigate and inspect every bridge in the state at least once every 2 years, some more frequently depending on their nature. We also manage, from a coordinating perspective, ports, all railroads. We have a little bit of dam inspection, and we have locks under our responsibility. We work with the federal government on all of the maritime activity in the state of Louisiana. But more importantly, because we're in South Louisiana and all across Louisiana for that matter, we manage disaster relief, and we are responsible for evacuation. We're responsible for repopulation of a community. We manage taking care of the roads during freezes, floods, and storms. And so our responsibility is very broad. We handle most signals. We've got over 5,000 signals in the state of Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken. We've got thousands and thousands of stripes, and we mow a lot of grass, and we pick up a lot of litter. So we're pretty broad in nature,
Awesome responsibility. You're walking into a situation and inheriting a department where a lot of eyes are on you from the overall quality of our infrastructure standpoint. We're going to talk a lot about that as we go forward. But I assume that based on some of the things you talked about, you have to work a lot with other state agencies as well. Disaster,
Absolutely.
State police, FEMA, a lot of different organizations. Talk about those relationships.
Sure. So we're responsible for 2 emergency support functions, but on a regular basis, we work with DEQ. on permitting processes. We work with natural resources as we build roads and bridges and go through a permitting process. We work with the Department of Culture and Recreation and Tourism from a historic perspective. And so if you think about roads, if you think about airports, for example, that also fall under our responsibility, noise, line of sight, all of that affects historic districts. So we're responsible for that. We have relationships with Department of Health because everything from our transit operations that we provide for elderly to get to health care and other medical services. We move folks who are in difficult situations, physically speaking, during disaster. And then also from a health perspective, we have outcomes that we like to see for folks in terms of active transportation, making sure that they're safe in terms of pedestrians. And so I tell people the Department of Transportation infiltrates their lives in ways they don't imagine. Everything you own, buy, sell, or trade, or do in the state of Louisiana involves infrastructure.
And you guys touch it in some way. I also assume that you've brought a pretty good relationship with economic development as well, as they are working to attract industry.
Absolutely.
Infrastructure is generally a big part of what these industries are looking for. Talk about that.
Here's what makes us unique. We have a D at the end of our title, and it's called Department of Transportation and Development. And before economic development was the buzzword, it was really public works, because if you look at how communities developed, if you look at how cities developed, they developed around things like rivers, ports, things that required major infrastructure. And so the D in development really talks about how do you build value, how do you build investment, how do you move goods and services to and through a community. And that's what the department is focused on, Department of Transportation and Development. They coexist. If you look at this nation around interstates, interstates are where you see all of the hubs of activity.
Right.
You have great neighborhoods and subdivisions and schools and communities adjacent to that, but as you go and go further away from the corridor of the interstate, you see other lifestyle components. And even in that regard, when you look at transit-oriented development, when you look at streetcars, when you look at passenger rail and commuter rail, all of those are elements that bring value, greater proportions of value to communities. And I've seen studies where you look at the revenue that's generated in the community and the expenditures that are made in a community, and they follow those corridors of development. And we see ourselves as a complement, not as a conflict for that development, whether it's interstates through urban areas like we're looking at here in Baton Rouge or in Lafayette, or if it's other components and rural components, rural areas of the state, we're interested in doing that as well.
A lot of responsibility, therefore, you know, the budget of your department becomes critically important. So let's talk about that. So if you think about federal funds that flow in, state dollars that come in, mostly through our gasoline taxes, give us an overview of that budget. How much do you spend? How much of that might be federal money? How much of that is state-generated money? And let's talk about this gas tax a little bit as well.
Absolutely. So more than half of the $1.2 billion budget I have is really federal funds, but I don't look at it as funds coming from the federal government. Those are dollars that we're sending to the federal government when you fill up your gas tax. Absolutely. 18.4 cents is what you pay. It goes to Washington and it comes back to us.
That's the federal gas tax.
That's the federal gas tax. And it comes with strings. And so there's this myth out there that only 11 cents of every dollar is going to construction. Well, in reality, 11 cents is being used to match the federal funds that we get. If we didn't use that 11 cents, we would not get the federal funds back. So we're bringing your dollars home with that. The balance of that 11 cents that we generate at the state level.
And that gas tax at the state level is
it's 16 cents.
16 cents.
You have a temporary tax of 4 cents on top of that that's going to expire in 2050, but it's already spent, so I'm not getting that. I'm just using it for debt service. But at the end of the day, that 16 cents that you pay is used to match federal funds, but it's also used to maintain the system. And so when you look at congestion, when you look at potholes, when you look at all of the mowing that we have to do, the picking up litter, changing signs, changing signals, all of those things that we're responsible for, that the federal funds are no longer eligible for once we send it, I have to use those funds for that. So that's where we get the 16 cents. And I will tell you, it's by far not enough. In 1989, when we passed the initial gas tax, it was not indexed. And as a result, that gas tax is only worth about 7.5 cents in today's value. And more importantly, we're having to pay that debt service on that temporary tax by 1 penny. And it's going to grow over time and cut into what we're going to be doing. And if we don't make a real investment, we're going to be spending less than 5 cents, I would suspect, in the next 1.5 to 2 years as an effective rate for our gas tax.
No question but that gas gas tax has not kept up with needs and inflation and all of those sort of things. But I want to talk about some of those options and how Louisiana's budget and its gas tax compares to some of our neighboring states.
Absolutely.
We'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll focus on those things. We're visiting with Dr. Shawn Wilson. He's the Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. And you're watching the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
Consumers and property owners with construction projects can have a successful result or regretful experiences that could have been avoided. Before any construction project, verify licensure of the contractor and check references. Scammers will claim to be insured or bonded, so always check first. Download our app, LA Contractor, from the Android or Apple Store. Visit our website, lacontractor.org, or contact the Louisiana State Licensing Board for Contractors. We're here to help before things go wrong. Hire a licensed contractor. It's the law.
What if I said that the American dream is alive and well, and that it exists for anyone willing to build it? That the power of a nation does not reside in its monuments, but in the hearts and minds of those who built them, and that the country's greatest heroes also wear hard hats. In today's America, it's not enough to dream about the future. You have to build it. Build your future at byf.org.
For more than 20 years, the TJC Group has been helping companies assess their training needs and to develop programs that improve the effectiveness and productivity of their teams.
Training doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. Let us put our experience and expertise to work for you.
The TJC Group, facilitating solutions for business and industry.
Spadel's Florist was founded over 30 years ago. From my mom's kitchen, we have grown into one of the largest florists in this area. There's a sense in our community that you stick together, good times or bad, and oil and gas is part of that family. They're my neighbors, they're my customers, they're the person I'm sitting next to at church. If oil and gas is doing well, all of our businesses are doing well. We are Louisiana Oil and Gas.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Shawn Wilson, Secretary of Louisiana's DOTD, is our guest. We talked about the gas tax in Louisiana, which really funds your operation, $1.2 billion
100%
or so.
of our funds come from gas tax.
So no additional state funding through the general fund. 18.5 cents is the federal gas tax. 16 cents is the permanent Louisiana gas tax. You've had this additional 4 cents as a temporary tax for a number of years now. How does that compare to other southern states? How does our investment in our infrastructure compare per capita to, say, Texas, Mississippi,
Correct.
Alabama, our neighboring states?
Well, you mentioned Texas, and here's the reality for Texas. They have a gas tax, state gas tax of 20 cents, which is equal to our 16 cents plus the temporary tax. Their entire 20-cent gas tax covers their match responsibilities. They're spending an additional $2.5 billion a year out of their general fund and or other revenue sources to invest in infrastructure. And that's how Texas has such a really nice infrastructure system. They have toll roads, they have vast numbers of people, way more than what we would have in Louisiana just in one state there, one city in Houston. There's 3 times as many people in Houston, in the greater Houston area, than we have in the entire state of Louisiana. Right. And even when you get outside of the urban areas of Texas, you have a very robust infrastructure system because of that additional investment. And that's where Louisiana's challenged. If you go to Mississippi, their gas tax is very similar to what we have, but they do not have the need that we have in terms of the population, in terms of the industrial growth.
Smaller population, fewer miles, all that
fewer miles, fewer bridges. They don't have all the responsibility for aviation, rail, maritime transit that we do here in ports. And so when you compare apples to apples, we're unique in that we probably have a much greater need, as we are the original multimodal city, multimodal state because of the Louisiana Purchase and the Great Mississippi River, but our demands are so great. And when you look at the entire country, there are only 4 other states that have not adjusted their gas tax longer than Louisiana hasn't adjusted its gas tax. And so over 25 other states since 2012 have made adjustments in revenue investment or investing in infrastructure, unlike Louisiana. We're one of a few states that have gone nearly 30 years without an additional investment, sustainably speaking. And I know you understand this more than anyone else from a business perspective. You can't make a one-time investment in business and let it just dwindle. And that's where we are in Louisiana. It's not anyone's individual's fault, but I think we made a decision to rely heavily on one-time money as opposed to having a sustained investment in infrastructure. And when you have a sustained investment, you don't need as much on the front end if you get it annually and you can program those dollars. And that's what we do best. We manage dollars in the long term.
Well, that leads us to another conversation that you and I were having during the break, and that is that there has been this perception out there for years and years and years that DOTD is a bloated and inefficient bureaucracy. You've done a lot over the course of the time that you've been there, and especially in the last year as secretary, to combat that. I saw a statistic that said only about 4.5% or so of your total budget goes toward it. Talk about that.
4.5% of a $1.2 billion budget is spent on admin. That's paper, pencils, travel. Because the vast majority of what we're spending is direct service, which means I am paying to fix a pothole. I am paying to fill a ditch, I'm paying to clean a ditch or clean a drain, or we're paying to restripe a road or overlay a road. Those dollars aren't admin dollars, they're actual investments in capital. Except our methodology of doing it is we're investing in people to do the work. We buy the materials and it's much more affordable for us to do the work. Now on the flip side, I will tell you, I've been at DOTD for nearly a decade now, having been chief of staff under 3 different secretaries, 2 different governors, 2 different parties, and this is a bipartisan issue. This is unlike any other issue in government, I think, and it's constitutional. This is in the United States Constitution and originally was to build and maintain roads. When I got to DOTD, we had over 1,200 more employees than we do today. How did that happen? Well, the department did several efficiency studies. One, the biggest cut happened by DOTD's own doing, where we went through the process and said, let's find what we don't need to do anymore. Let's find things that we want to adjust. And we downsized the department intentionally, using retirement. There were some changes in structure. And as a result, we're 1,200 people less than where we were when I walked through the door. Unfortunately, none of the responsibilities have changed.
Yeah,
the miles have been added.
Right,
I mean, we added 500 lane miles with the time program with not $1 for maintenance, not $1 extra for mowing, but we added all of this tremendous work. Our responsibilities on an emergency perspective have quadrupled since I took over the department, since I joined the department as an employee 12 years ago. And so when you look at efficiency, I think we have become very efficient. We have been efficient because our budget continues to decline. The value of the dollar we get declines. Our revenue has been pretty maintained, has been steady. Our salaries have been steady. The biggest increase in our investments at the department and our expenditures have been in the area of retirement, healthcare, all of those things that we don't control.
Right.
We control the numbers of people, and that's gone down. And I've got a slide I show people where we've dropped 1,200 people over the last 10, 12 years, but our costs are going up with with fewer people. And so as a result, I think that's really efficiency. That's where you find that efficiency. And we've done 3 or 4 other exercises since then. Most recently, we just completed Operation 57, where we went through every department in our office, every section in our department, and said, are you doing work that's still relevant? Is there a more efficient way to do it? Can we allocate our human resources differently? And we've dropped a couple of those sections. We've put our people where they can do more work and be more effective. So I tell people there's an alternative truth to what's happening at DOTD. If you look at the statistics, look at the numbers, and don't go just with the myth or the perception of what we have. And I think you'll see that you've got a very efficient department.
Well, it's always easy to criticize when you're on the outside. If you get in and look at the actual data, it tells a different story, and you guys are doing a decent job.
In fact, I would tell you from an admin perspective, we're in the top 7 in the country when you look at departments of transportation and development, or departments of transportation, because we are development, unlike other states. We're in the top 7 for having the lowest admin costs. And we've got more miles per capita than most of our sister states, and we're spending less money on our infrastructure than most of our sister states, and our needs far outweigh those other states.
Let's take a break. We come back. I want to talk about the governor's transportation task force. I want to talk about future direction. I want to talk about additional revenue. We're visiting with Dr. Shawn Wilson. He's the Secretary of Louisiana DOTD, and you're watching the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
For over a quarter century, Kelly's has operated with honesty, integrity, and above all, safety. Kelly's features a fleet of quality equipment operated by dedicated, safety-minded employees skilled in land clearing, above-ground right-of-way maintenance, vegetation control, station yard and manned facility maintenance, above-ground pipeline support, and more. Kelly's Industrial Services, where pipeline right-of-way maintenance gets done right.
For more than 25 years, the TJC Group has been helping industry communicate and build relationships with communities, elected officials, and governmental agencies. We are the leading firm in the U.S. for the development, management, and facilitation of industry-based community advisory panels.
Whether you're building a new facility or you manage an existing business, let us put our community and governmental relations experience to work for you.
The TJC Group, facilitating solutions for business and industry.
What if I said that whatever good things you build you? And that in this economy, sweat never loses its value? What if I said that there isn't a challenge in the world too great for a craft professional with the right tools? And that the steps that lead from where you are to where you want to be can only be built by you? Build your future at byf.org.
Keene Miller traces its roots to the dawn of the petrochemical industry in Louisiana. As the legal needs of the sector grew, our firm emerged as a leader in environmental law, economic development, real estate, employment, utilities regulations, and more. Today, these same clients and those new to our state continue to rely upon the firm and its attorneys for creative ideas, practical advice, and Louisiana know-how. Industrial strength law. Learn more at KeeneMiller.com.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Dr. Shawn Wilson, Secretary of Louisiana DOTD, is our guest. $12 billion backlog. We hear a lot about that. I think it's $12 billion plus at this point.
13.1. I hate to correct you.
13.1. It grows. 12 plus, somewhere between 12 and $15 billion in major project needs in terms of capacity and relieving a lot of traffic issues we have around the state. So $25 plus billion worth of need, demand that's out there. Governor has formed this task force. You guys have been looking at the need and ways to possibly fund it. I think there's a recommendation that there's at least $700 million a year in new revenue needed. Talk about the task force, talk about the demand, talk about the new revenue need.
So the governor's task force said to do two things. One, do a much better job of maintaining and operating the system we have. That's the $13 billion needs list. That is what we have to do. Right. He also said, let's go do some of those wants. That's that other $12 to $15 billion project you're talking about, or in projects. So how are we going to do that? The task force went all around the state, talked to over 750 folks, and not one person said, let's not invest. They said, let's in fact invest more. Let's think regionally. Let's think that urban areas and rural areas are important, and address the critical nature of our bridges. So we suggested a figure of about $700 million of annual invested infrastructure. Earlier in this interview or this discussion, we talked about a steady increase or a steady revenue stream. That $700 is based on the projects that we've known we needed to do and the needs that we've had. So we're recommending to the legislature, and the governor is now vetting that with his legislative partners. What is that amount? Is it gas tax? Is it coming from some other revenue source? The fact that we're using a lot of the sources that are typically used now for the transportation, for the state's general fund instead of transportation. So that $700 million is significant. We also said, let's be smart. Let's figure out a way to sustain that investment in terms of indexing it. We don't want to do it. We didn't pick a way. We just said, figure out a way, legislature, on indexing.
So that it grows over time.
So that it grows and
needs,
just maintains its value.
Right.
It doesn't even have to grow if it maintains its value.
Right.
We said, let's do some policy solutions, things like public-private partnerships and tolling, many of which we've already set the stage and made some modifications to get it right, and I think we'll talk about those a little bit later. And we also said, do it smart. Let's invest categorically speaking. Let's not have an overlay project in rural Louisiana compete with a new bridge in Baton Rouge, because they're apples and oranges.
Right.
One has an economic imperative, the other one has an economic imperative, but they're different scales. One has to do with a plant, one has to do with the farm. We need to do both if we want to maintain growth for the entire state of Louisiana.
You know, one of the things as you talk about the backlog and this demand for these new projects is how do you expedite construction? So, look, we know there's going to be a fight over the new dollars and trying to figure out where those dollars come from. I think it is universally agreed, as you said, that we've got to have additional investment in our infrastructure in the state for a lot of different reasons. Safety, economic development, a lot of things. How do we expedite? You know, let's assume we do get some level of new revenue going forward, and I think we will. Now, what level that is, we'll have to see. How do we expedite some of these projects?
Absolutely. So we would agree with LBIS leadership and others who said, here are the principles for new funding. It's got to be dedicated to transportation, it needs to address mega projects, and it needs to be meaningful in its investment. So those are the three principles that we went with, and we're proposing something, and 2 weeks ago, as you know, we announced the beginnings of a P3.
Public-private
partnerships. And someone was in the office says it's P3, not P-free. So the critical factor is you've got to have a revenue stream.
Right.
And if we tried to do a P3 without additional dollars, we would be closing down districts. There would be things we're doing today that we would not do in place of something new. And that's not smart. That's not for our future. And so 2 weeks ago, as you know, we announced the beginnings of this process for Louisiana. We're jump-starting. We're that confident that something will be done. So we issued a request for information on a P3 to go from West Baton Rouge, East Baton Rouge to Ascension to help fix that I-10 corridor. There are several projects. As you know, Governor Edwards and I announced a design build for Highland to 73. There are strategic widenings that we can do. We're doing the Terrace Street off-ramp. So we're looking at some of these examples of projects. PQ, for example, is another important project. We want to use P3 opportunities to fund segments and pieces of that. So we've already gone out with an RFI that if we get funding, we're ahead of the game in that regard. We've had this legislation for many years. Last year, Governor Edwards signed a bill that we asked for to allow the state to do a solicited partnership, and that's what we're doing. We're being innovative. We're doing what other states are doing, and so we're excited about that project and what it might mean for this corridor, not to replace the need for a new bridge, but to manage traffic and mobility through here until that new bridge is done.
Well, obviously, you mentioned it earlier. Texas has done this with great success, these public-private partnerships. So we got about a minute and 15 seconds, so let's hit these relatively quickly. You mentioned some things in Baton Rouge, but Lafayette and New Orleans, two other major markets for this show. Give us an idea of maybe some big projects that we can look forward to there.
I-49 South is a critical project for Lafayette. We've had unprecedented public involvement. We're dealing with the facts. We're doing best practices, and we want to build an infrastructure that complements that community. That progress is moving. Until we make an environmental decision on this update that we're doing, we can't ever ask for new money or dedicate money. $1 billion is not a lot of money in infrastructure. We can do it piece by piece, bit by bit, and that's my commitment. New Orleans, Loyola Interchange. We've got $1 billion airport that does not have access to the interstate. We need a better solution to that traffic challenge. We're looking at transit in terms of commuter rail between Baton Rouge and New Orleans to create a super region. And we've got the other widening piece that we need to move forward from Causeway to Veterans on the interstate to manage traffic down there.
Quickly, back to the Baton Rouge region, any progress in picking a location for a potential new Mississippi River Bridge, even though the funding doesn't exist?
Absolutely. We are moving forward even without funding within the resources. We funded our environmental process. We're looking at 5 crossings. All of them affect traffic in the same exact way. And so we're moving forward with that. And I would suspect that in the very near future, we're going to have more discussion in the public about it.
Got to have you back soon because there's much more to talk about, including quality of place, litter, aesthetics, beautification, safety, those things. Dr. Shawn Wilson, thank you.
Appreciate it.
That's a wrap, guys. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week at this very same time for another edition of the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.